exciting to see how many people in San Antonio like to start their day once a month with a little dose of creativity, and I truly think events like this are really what we need. So big congratulations to Kylie and the entire Creative Mornings team for a successful first year. And we, the DoSeum, we're kind of in the business of birthday parties, so we could not be happier to host the first birthday for Creative Mornings. So a round of applause for them. So when Kylie told me that the topic this month was Muse, it was really interesting because as a museum, we've got the word in our name, and so inspiration is a big thing that we think about. And of course here at the DoSeum, we very rarely do anything in a vacuum. We really enjoy working collaboratively. So it was kind of impossible for us to think of just one person who should speak. So we decided to do something a little bit different and have three of us on our education team. Sorry about the quality of some of these pics. There was a time before digital. So today you're going to hear a little bit from Richard, who's our Vice President of Education, Chris, who's our Director of Partnerships and Community Programs, and then myself, I'm Director of Gallery Programs. And what we hope to share with you guys is a little bit of each of us personally, how as three grown adults, we end up spending all of our time in a children's museum every day. And then through our conversations, through our musings about Muse, we kind of arrived at this conclusion that was really kind of eye-opening about our institution. So we're going to end with the three of us kind of speaking broader about the DoSeum and really what our Muse as an institution is. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard.
Great, thank you. And welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. We're so excited to have you here this morning. As Sheena mentioned, my name is Richard. I'm the Vice President of Education here at the DoSeum. I started this position in June of last year, so I'm just a little over a year of being here in San Antonio, and I love it, and I love the DoSeum. So as Sheena mentioned, we thought we'd talk a little bit about what brought us here, what led our career paths to be all here together from different worlds. And essentially for me, as you can see from that picture up there with my little dinosaur cake and that awesome 80s wallpaper, I love dinosaurs. I've always loved dinosaurs. My dad was a coal miner. I grew up in western Pennsylvania. And in western Pennsylvania, you were either a miner or a steel worker, and he was the former. And he would bring home, every once in a while, not every day, a little fossil that they found in the mine that particular morning or that particular evening, depending on what shift he was working. And that concept, seeing a little fern fossil, seeing a little slice of tree bark, that was unlike anything that was on the surface, really captivated me. The concept that this planet was not always as it is today, and that these fossils are little puzzle pieces to reconstruct what those ancient worlds might have looked like. And we were always hoping he'd find a dinosaur there, of course. And 2 geology degrees later, I know you're never going to find a dinosaur in coal seam. But still, the hope was there. But that really ignited my passion for the natural world and just asking why. I often say scientists are simply those kids who never stop asking why. Why this? Why that? Why does it look like that? Why is it that color? That's really the fundamental root of science, is just being curious and having a curiosity. So I went off to school and was pursuing paleontology, but also always had an interest in museums. I grew up again outside of Pittsburgh, went to the Carnegie Museum quite a bit, great collection of dinosaurs, great collection of just natural objects, and that was just fueling that deep interest of mine. So I'd always wanted to work in a museum, and I'm proud to say, and I don't know if I should be, but I'm proud to say that I literally have only ever been employed by museums. One could say my focus is too narrow, but I love it. And when I was finishing my PhD, that's when I made the switch from focusing on scientific research to STEM outreach, and have worked in museums ever since. And so what brought me to the DoSeum in particular was really the facility and the team and the mission. And the fact that, at the DoSeum, growing minds is core to our mission. And what I love about early learners, all of my previous museums have been all ages of learners. But I really love the focus up through the age of 10 or 11 here at the DoSeum. Not that I don't love all learners, I love all learners, but that particular age group is so fearless in their approach to how they ask questions and how they try to find answers to those questions. And it's really amazing to see them challenge themselves. And in education here, we really don't see ourselves as teachers as much as we see ourselves as facilitating and letting the child lead. And of course, that's deeply rooted in educational theory and pedagogical approaches that we follow here within our department. But really having that child lead and having their learning based on what they're bringing with them that particular day, be it a camp, be it a field trip, is really inspiring, and just fostering what they're interested in is really wonderful. And seeing them learn that way, seeing their parents learning the same way, and seeing their caregivers learning aspects of their child that they maybe weren't aware of when they came to the museum is really inspiring. And so working with this particular age group, working in this amazing facility that we have, working with this wonderful team that we have here, is really, really wonderful, and I really can't believe how quickly the past year went. So at the DoSeum, growing minds is a part of our mission, literally. And when I look at these kids coming through, whether they're getting off of the yellow school bus or coming in with their caregivers, I kind of see little me back in the day, walking in with that same wide-eyed fascination and interest and desire to learn about the natural world. And that's basically what brought me here today. And so I'm still at heart that little wide-eyed kid that came in. And so it's definitely easy to relate to them. And I'm just fortunate enough to be on this end of it and assist with that particular learning. And with that, I'm going to now hand the baton over to Mr. Christopher Navarro.
When I say do, you say Zeum. Do.
Zeum.
Do.
Zeum.
When I say do, you say Zeum. Do.
Zeum.
Do.
Zeum.
Guys, I have a confession. My name is Chris, and I am a playaholic. So when we had the first conversation about this, it felt like what I would talk about was somewhere between being at a 12 Steps program or giving a sermon. So it's going to kind of go back and forth between the two. So transforming communities has been an element in my family. When I describe why I'm in education, I remind myself and want for everyone to know the struggles that my parents and grandparents went through. So education was not something that was accessible to them because of their ethnicity, because of the color of their skin, because they were migrant laborers, and that's just how things were. But they were extremely intelligent people who found opportunity and made a life for themselves and instilled in our generation. They were sort of the Forrest Gump generation, right? Because they were able to, without going to university or college, become educated people through job experiences. But what they wanted for our generation was to have access to formal education. And so then, having seen the lives of my family transformed through education, became very important for me to be transformed and figure out how I might help to transform others. But I couldn't stop playing. So the other thing that they were able to do, because of their work ethic and good fortune, was build a space for my family, the people in my generation, to have more recreational time and play. And that is not a bad thing. So transforming through education is a bright light, but it can also maybe be a source of darkness, right? Because school for some people can be a place of anxiety and solitude and frustration and anger, and that happened to me. On the flip side of that, my family never forgot about how to play, regardless of what their life was like when they were traveling around the country picking fruit, picking cotton, or when they built the house that my grandmother passed away in, or struggled to get other jobs that would lead to where we were able to get to. So that playing came through sports and cards and pool. My grandmother says she rescued my grandfather because he was kind of a hustler, and I got that from him. And he approached life with humor and playfulness. And the way that I found that I could do that within a formal environment of education was theater arts. I loved playing music, I loved drawing, I loved dancing around like a fool, I loved writing, and I wanted to do it all, and theater happened to be the way that I could. But the playfulness can also have a dark side, and that dark side is risk, right? And risk is not a bad thing unless you run with a pack of wild boys who sometimes play music and then sometimes find themselves speeding around town in cars and, almost killing themselves and not realizing that that's what they were doing. So it became clear to me that there are people in the community that need both transformation through education and then a place where they can continue to be playful and channel the need for risk into learning and creating and designing and figuring out how that contributes back to the community and back to the betterment of their own life. And so I meandered through a career. I've been a formal educator, taught digital communications, English, theater arts, and was really fortunate to find administrators who supported my addiction to play and let me build spaces where that was possible. And then I became really interested in the informal landscape as I piloted after-school programs and found that there's also a need for the out-of-school time. Like, what else can kids do besides what they have to do when they're in school? And so I was really fortunate to have a set of friends and colleagues who supported my desire to be playful, but let's do it in a way that is also thoughtful and structured. And how do we build that was the question for me. And I tried a lot of things and got really lucky to be hired at the San Antonio Children's Museum, and got there when it was about to transform into the DoSeum. So I was empowered to be creative and part of the design team, and also bring the best of my experiences as a classroom teacher and figure out how do we bring these two worlds together to transform the community. Because it is possible. We want to build the bridge between that need that children have to be playful and the need that they have to be empowered learners and creators. And I get to do that here with beautiful people like Richard and Sheena. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sheena.
Awesome. I guess I'm the only one that wrote notes, huh? All right. So this is such an interesting question. What is your muse? And I think for me, to really think about what motivates you, what gets you every day coming to work full of ideas, full of inspiration. I had to think back about me as a kid. And I'll just give you a little picture of my childhood. So around the age of 5, I remember having 2 goals. One was to move away to New York, and the other was that I'd be some kind of artist. And they're not really common goals that I think a lot of 5-year-olds have, but that need for freedom and independence was always there for me. To give you a little background about my family, my dad was born in a liberation camp in Germany right after the Holocaust. Both my grandparents were the only survivors in their families, and when they moved to San Antonio, essentially they brought nothing with them. No family, no English, no resources. And my dad grew up being that kid who had an onion for lunch, or stayed on the playground till 10 o'clock till the police took him home. Not because he wasn't coming from a loving family, but because he was coming from a culture so disconnected from what 1950s San Antonio looked like. My mother, on the other hand, was born here, but she struggled with a variety of physical and mental illness when I was a kid, and still does. And so because of her own limitations, I kind of had this childhood where I really was empowered to create my own fun and create my own how I spent my time. So I kind of was a weird kid. I would obsessively draw things in my room, and I had these ideas about fun things kids do. So even, when I was 11, I started running a camp out of my house for my sister's friends. And so it's funny because when I think back about my childhood as a grown-up, I do the same things, but now I get paid for it. Whereas as a kid, I was just doing it because, we didn't go to camp, so I could make a camp or that sort of thing. So when I got to college, because of my parents' upbringing, there was strong pressure to become a doctor, become a lawyer, like those are successful paths. So I think kind of as an act of rebellion, I ended up studying art. But then with that need to still people please, the question was always like, well, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so I had this idea that maybe I could work at a museum. That sounds like a real job, right? And so I kind of, studied art as a way to rebel, but then kind of chose the path of museums as a way to kind of like make it be okay. And so starting at age 18, I basically began working in art museums and never really looked back. And for me, art and education, it really comes from this idea. I remember in one of my first college classes, we learned about this concept of like the platonic ladder of love, right? The idea that we can start by loving a body, or in my case, an object, right, like a painting or a sculpture, and then the inspiration you feel from that, kind of gets you to think on that next level. You see beautiful objects, and then you have beautiful ideas, and through beautiful ideas, you create beautiful institutions, and through those beautiful institutions, beautiful laws and ideas and how we function becomes more beautiful. And I would say for me that was kind of the driving motivation in continuing to work in object-based fields. And so, over the course of my art museum career, I really focused on objects and thinking about bringing those objects to the community through camps or programs or that sort of thing. In 2011, something happened to me that kind of changed everything. Those shows where people have a baby, but they didn't know they were going to have a baby, and you're like, what? Well, I kind of get it, because in 2011 my son was born, and while I knew I was going to have a baby, it wasn't until that moment where, somebody gives you a crying infant at 3 in the morning and says, here you go, Mom, and you're like, oh, like I'm the grown-up now, I'm the mom. So in 2011 when my son was born, it kind of changed my outlook both professionally but also personally. I became much more interested in, I guess for me the objects became a little bit less interesting, and what happened is the relationships that people formed around the objects, the experiences that we have together is really kind of what fascinated me. And at this moment in San Antonio, I wouldn't say there wasn't a lot for families, but we weren't where we are today. Baby programs in museums weren't a thing, toddler programs weren't a thing yet. And so I spent, a good 5-6 years of my career really developing those through art museums. And I would say my children were a huge source of inspiration, but at the same time, it was really like, not so much about the Monet, but about the dad who took off from work to come see the Monet with his kid at this family day. That really is what struck me. And what I noticed when we evaluated programs, at the end of the day, people very rarely wrote about the objects they were seeing. They wrote more about the family time, the connection, the togetherness. But something else was kind of happening at the same time, which was I found myself really struggling with this idea of being this perfect museum person that runs programs and like this perfect mother, and just trying to figure out the balance of those two, and only to realize like there's no perfection on either side. It's finding the balance. But through that question, I was forced to really look within and think about myself as knowing the examples I had from my parents, but consciously wanting to be a different kind of parent for my kids. Being there, connecting with them in these moments that create memories and create meaning. And that's really, I think, where I took that little turn and realized, maybe it's time to leave the object world and go more towards the experience world, which is what led me to the DoSeum, where everything in this building is designed to be touched, played with, worked on together. So really, I think as I thought about my muse, Like, yes, it's my children, and yes, it's all the children who come on field trips or camps or, you know, we visit out in the community, but it's also that, like, inner child that I think we all have within us. But, you know, I think there's part of me that feels like if my family had done more fun community things together, if I had gone to camp, like, what would things have been like? And while, you know, ultimately, you know, your experiences shape who you become, I think that's what really motivates me to create experiences for people to come here and to really get to see what that collaboration, where an adult is learning from their child in the same way that the child is learning probably from their parents, but also just the interaction. So I guess my charge for everybody today would be, you know, when you're thinking about your muse, it comes kind of deep from within. So what is that part of you that kind of motivates you to the actions that you do, to what you do? So the cool thing for us, though, was as the three of us sat around thinking about this, oops, I forgot to take pictures. Here's a cute family. See how they're learning together? But Richard and Chris, if y'all want to come back up here, as we sat around the table talking about these ideas, you know, Richard really talking about growing minds, thinking about science, you know, Chris really thinking about play and community, and then me really thinking about the family experience and creating connection between people. What happened, and this is no joke or coincidence, we arrived at our mission statement, which the DoSeum's mission statement, even before this conversation, has always been, through joyful learning and discovery, the DoSeum grows minds, connects families, and transforms communities. So I guess it's just really cool for us that who we each are as individual educators ultimately comes back to what our organization's mission is, which is kind of like our muse. So with that, I don't know if there's anything you guys want to add to that. Here had the three-headed dragon and some costume hats, and I'll turn it over to you.
So we have a three-headed dragon. And what we talked about was, I run a nonprofit, I'm the artistic director for a new nonprofit in town called Teatro Untitled. And what we do is we do African folk tales each year at the Carver Public Cultural Center. So what we talked about was using the dragon. We took the dragon, we took the hats, and we made the story that we came up with was the three-headed dragon is always misunderstood. The dragon is always thought to be so mean and so dangerous. And then you have, of course, the archer, or who's basically trying to kill the dragon. And we wanted to teach the kids that that's almost a misconception because, you know, the dragon, the only way he knows to communicate is to do what? Blow fire. So he can be your friend. He can help knock down trees, which would be a good thing, but just they can be recycled. They can be recycled. He can help make s'mores. He can help scare off things that could potentially be dangerous, and he can be your friend, so everyone can just get along.
Awesome. So how that definitely is a way to connect communities through story. Does any other group want to share? We've got time for one more group. Anybody? Come on. Over there? Okay, perfect. Their prop was the plastic balls from upstairs. We have a gallery called Force Course that's all about simple machines, where kids get to kind of put the balls through different tubes and stuff and learn about how simple machines work. So that's what your prop is.
Morning. My name is Miguel Sadu. I'm visiting today. I'm actually the video producer for CreativeMornings in Omaha, but I was born and raised here in San Antonio. Thanks for having me. So we weren't sure if the party hats and these kind of magnifying glass looking objects were part of our props. So we decided to kind of go for it and use it all. And we were kind of playing with the idea of making like a mandala or some kind of symmetrical work of art that kind of ties classical art with these unconventional, playful objects. But we decided in the spirit of collaboration it would be really cool if we made a game of it and encourage some sharing and collaboration. So we thought it could be cool. We didn't get too far into it. We thought it would be really cool to make a board game using the plastic balls and party hats and the spectrum. And the objective of the game is to use the rolling balls to pass them back and forth to your opponents, but also to kind of trade elements, kind of like in Monopoly, you have to collaborate and work with people around the table. And the objective of the game is to create the full spectrum of color combinations. So, for example, if you were to have the red square and combine it with, the other colors, like blue, you could accomplish purple and check that off your list. And the first person to get through the color spectrum, through this process of collaboration, ends up winning the game.
It's funny that you designed this because actually in December we're thinking about doing our first family workshop that's all about designing your own board game with your family. So come back to celebrate it.
I have to admit that at one of our Creative Mornings in Omaha, our speaker was a professional board game designer. He's very, very inspirational. He has a game called Bees. It's like bees with a lot of E's. And it's a big hit. If anyone's into board games, I should definitely check it out.
Thank you guys so much. I guess at this point, if anybody has any questions for Chris or me, we could take a couple questions and then we'll be all done. Okay. Any questions? Yes, Katie.
So when you travel, do you check out other children's museum type
Yes.
tourism?
Yes, we do.
Highlights that you recommend?
And it's really fun. This year I went to my first ever Children's Museum conference, the Association of Children's Museums. And first of all, it's really playful people, really fun people, which is cool. But for the big party at the end of the conference, we got to go to the Denver Children's Museum, which was just out of this world. And you definitely bring back ideas from other institutions. And then it's also really cool to meet people who have their same job but somewhere else. So yeah, I would say even with our families, probably just traveling, we always try to check out what's going on.
I think for me, it's with the family, so, just of course letting the kiddo have fun wherever they are. But it's exciting to see children's museums at different stages of development. So being in there's one in Galveston now, right, that just opened very recently, and it kind of reminds me of where the San Antonio Children's Museum must have been, and what I can tell, when it first kicked off. And in a place like that, or in a place that's been around longer, that has a different model than us, everywhere I can go and steal ideas. So.
Yes. What's your all's biggest challenge right now?
Biggest challenge? Good question. I think for me, one thing that I'm learning is in my position here at the DoSeum, I've worked in a lot of positions where it's been really hands-on with the kids, teaching camps, leading programs. Now I'm in a much more strategic planning kind of position. So it's a lot of, I love thinking about the big picture, but it's also about learning how to work with a diverse team of educators. Our team, and just so you don't get the wrong idea, it's not just 3 of us. Our education staff is probably close to 30, 40? Somewhere between 30 and 40, a lot of part-time educators that teach our programs. You can probably hear the field trips out in the galleries right now. So for me, it's a lot about learning. It's almost like when you're a classroom teacher and you've got a classroom full of different personalities and different ways of learning, and it's bringing that together to work together as a classroom. I think our team feels a lot like that too, where sometimes you're learning how to navigate a landscape of different people, different personalities, different strengths, and getting everybody moving towards the bigger strategic goals. So I think for me, that's not a bad challenge, but just where I'm at in my career, that is a new challenge.
So if I maybe a good and a bad challenge, and the good one really related to what Sheena's talking about. So we innovate here, and part of the innovation is bringing together formal and informal educators. So that's part of the diversity too, not just sort of diverse individuals, but experience that comes from schools and experience that comes from other nonprofits or museums. And it's challenging because it's difficult to blend those things, but it's really exciting when we're able to do that and strike gold. The bad challenge with outreach is making sure that we are in every area of the community. So there's a capacity constraint on that. There's only so many of us that are able to go out. And we continue to be really thoughtful. We've got continuing to have a really great development team that helps us to understand the landscape of the city and how we can maneuver that. And just very recently looking at where we have not had a strong presence in the city actually matches up to a zip code analysis that is one of the most underserved areas of the city. So that was sort of a red flag for us that we need to get out into those neighborhoods and figure out what we can do to be present there as well, and that's challenging.
Cool. If nobody has any other questions, thank you guys so much for coming. And again, thank you Creative Mornings for putting on this awesome event. We're so happy to celebrate your first birthday with you. Thank you.